So I'm going to give you an audacious promise in the beginning that at the end of this session, you're going to walk out of here happier than when you walked in. Everything I'm going to be sharing with you is very practical and scientific based. The challenge is, why have I been so interested in positive psychology for over a decade? Well, I ran into a problem almost 20 years ago. I'm 53 and I retired when I was 36. I had a successful Wall Street firm that I started when I was in my mid-20s, and by the time I was 36, I was done and thought, American dream, early retirement. However, it was actually the biggest mistake I ever made in my life. The first day that I was retired, I remember taking a walk. I bought a lake. I'm taking a walk along my beach, and I was like, nobody needs me. I don't matter anymore. I used to have 1,200 clients, and my phone was always blowing up. My email box was always full. Nothing. And it was really depressing. I didn't have a plan B. And what I realized was the American dream was not my dream. The unfortunate thing is I kept trying to make it my dream. Well, what ended up happening? Started drinking a lot, started smoking a lot, got really depressed, but I never sought help because I didn't have a real reason to be depressed. I actually finally broke down and went to the doctor. I was misdiagnosed for lots of different things, and I went through 24 different psychotropic drugs. They didn't really work. The side effects worked. I lost my sex drive. I gained about 50 pounds. I couldn't see outside my right eye, so I had to get a driver because I couldn't drive anymore. So it was pretty miserable. And then I got even more desperate, and I decided I'm going to study mind-body medicine because I'm out of options. And fortunately, at Harvard, they had the most popular class in their 500-year history, and it was positive psychology. Over 1,250 students had signed up, and I wiggled my way into the class. And that's actually what turned the tide for me. And what I learned was something really simple. I didn't have a purpose. So I went out and I started another company. And with that company, I ended up learning that I like to teach. And that's how I became an instructor at Harvard, because I was a student in an entrepreneurship class, and I had to take that class because I was a procrastinator at that point. So I took that class to do my startup. The startup was fine, sold that company and learned what I really like is teaching. And so now I'm going to share with you some reasons why I'm here today, because not only am I teaching at Harvard, but I've started teaching more and more at Hult. And in Hult, Boston, we had our first day of teaching the undergrads, and I told them my bio, that I had an anxiety and depression problem. Didn't think anything of it. On the second day of class, I have about 110 students. 11 of them came up to me on day 2. They've known me less than 48 hours and said, I have an anxiety and depression problem. Can you help me? And so I gave them some book recommendations, told them what worked for me, and what works for me may not work for you. Mentally, we're all little snowflakes, so maybe you like yoga, maybe you like journaling. Everyone's different. So I was very careful not to step into the liability portion of being a therapist and getting into therapy, because that's not what positive psychology is about. It's about normal people and learning how to thrive and really enjoy your life in certain ways. But when I went home that night, I realized, wow, that was 10% of my class. Came up to me and acknowledged that they had an anxiety and depression problem, and they were all women. And I thought, oh, the guys are shy. Guys have more macho thing around it. So that number's probably double. So that's about 20%. And I thought that number might even be higher because these people weren't shy. So I'm thinking we might be looking at 30% of the student population having an anxiety and depression problem, untreated. They might not even know about it. So I went to the dean of the graduate school, Gonzalo, and I told him what I just told you. And his eyes got really big, and I said, at what point do we call this an epidemic? And now that we're aware of it, what are we doing about it? And he said, well, what do you suggest? And I never go to people with a problem unless I have a solution. And I said, I took the positive psych class at Harvard years ago, and I still have my notes. I could reteach it. And he said, yes. So Hult is going to be getting, next fall, they've actually fast-tracked it potentially to this summer, to have the first positive psychology class here. And it was because of the students that I ran into that I saw there's a need, and the need is actually bigger than what I had thought. So this is a study on anxiety in college and what we know about it, and we're going to start with our first poll for this group. So I'm going to ask Julia to look at the audience, and I'd like all of you to look around to see the hands that raise. So I'm going to give you the question, and then we'll do the polling in a minute. The question is going to be, what percentage of college students do you think have anxiety and depression issues? Meaning they're just overly anxious and depressed. So we're going to be doing 10%, 20%, 30%, all the way up to 100. So raise your hand if you think that 10% of college students in the world have an anxiety problem. And just wait for the correct decile to fit. So no one at 10. 20%. We have one. 30%. Have a few. 40%. Okay. 50%. All right. 60%. 70%. 80%. 90%, 100%. So what was the bulk? Around, what? 70, I think? Yes. 63. That's huge. If this was the entire population, this part of the room has an anxiety and depression problem. So at what point do we feel that we have a responsibility to address this? And I think that we also have an opportunity because this could be the best years of your life. Now, I remember when I was in college, I was always anxious. I didn't know what depression really meant. I knew I was anxious. I was always worried. Raise your hand if you were pretty anxious when you were in college. Was that an issue for you? That's about 60%. So this may just be a normal rite of passage. However, it doesn't actually have to be this way. So today's agenda is going to be, what is positive psychology? How happy are you? That's what the surveys are going to be doing. Exercises that have been scientifically proven to work, and I encourage you to share this with your friends and coworkers, because the happier people are around you, the happier you will be, because people are pretty much contagious with their mood. And then I'm going to share with you some business applications and business opportunities for HALT, Ashridge, and EF to consider, and I think that there are some opportunities to increase revenue for all the organizations and also do a lot of good at the same time. So this is Dr. Martin Seligman. He was the head of the American Psychology Association in the United States. His job was to do something monumental during his tenure, and he basically coined the phrase positive psychology, and he is considered the father of positive psychology. He runs a department at the University of Pennsylvania, and in January, I'm going to be applying to their Masters of Positive Psychology program, and the challenge is they only take 38 people a year. However, they take people who can spread the word. So Harvard said, once I get my master's degree in this, they'll let me teach a course. Holt has already said yes, and the Boston Public School Systems have already said yes. So the more people I can reteach this curriculum to, the more likely I can get into the program. And the good news is, a lot of this is really easy to understand. It's also free once you teach it. This could easily be given free as an online course. Now take a look at this study on how happy people were. This was multiple populations, and the scale was 1 low, 7 is the highest. So they took a look at the 400 richest Americans, and they clocked in at 5.8 out of 7, because we feel that there's a correlation between money and happiness. Now, international college students, which is pretty much what we're looking at here, came in at 4.9. Well, okay, well, so you're not a billionaire and you're down by a point. That sounds pretty good. But when you compare it to Calcutta slum dwellers, they're kind of the same. So there's this weird linking between happiness and money, and then it delinks at the same time. So I'm going to try to make sense of why is money linked to happiness and why is it unlinked from happiness, and what is the exact relationship? So here is the happiness circle. Half of it's genetic, and you can't do anything about it. Either the glass is half full or half empty. It's just kind of the way you are. However, the other half you can do something about. You know, this is where most people focus, in the 10%, and they call that circumstances. So that's money, physical health, beauty? Do you have a job? Do you have loving relationships? What most people do is that they focus on the circumstances, but they don't focus on their peace of mind, what's happening with the way they look at the world. And this is where positive psychology works. But what's with this 10%? Well, imagine that the 10% is a drug, and the drug is called money or cocaine. They both work the same way. So what happens when you do your first line of cocaine? You love it, but you will never get that high again. And so since you liked it so much, what do? You do a second line of cocaine. And then what happens? It's still really good, but not quite like the first one. So you do another and another and another, and eventually you get tolerance and addiction and then withdrawal when you try to stop. Money's the same. When we get a little taste of money, if we've been poor, we love it. It's great. Hey, I'm living indoors. I can eat whenever I want. I'm warm. That's wonderful. And then I want a little bit more and a little bit more, but that high isn't as great. And the first time it happened to me was with material possessions. When I started earning money, I was around 26 years old, and I always wanted a Mercedes. That was my big thing. And my mom had one. And my dad got a really good deal on it. He paid $25,000 for it. It had retailed for like $65,000. This is back in the 90s. And my mom sold me her Mercedes for 25 grand. The car was beautiful. And I was all excited about it. So I go from New York City down to Maryland to get the car. I get the car, and they lived in this cul-de-sac. Get the car, and I'm driving out. I was 500 yards away from their house, and I could feel my emotions just go, "Ee." I'm like, what happened? I've been fantasizing about this car for years, and I'm not even a minute behind the wheel, and the thrill is like dripping away. And I started to look at it like, yeah, it's a wheel, there's a radio, there's a star on the hood, it's a car. And I couldn't understand why the thrill wore off. And I thought, well, maybe I need a new one because this one's used. And this is what people do. It becomes the disease of more. We think, well, it worked for a little bit, you know, the nice shoes and the car and the watch, but now the thrill wore off and maybe I need more. And that's what we do as a society, and that's the messaging that we get, more, more, more. But material possessions have a limited shelf life of how much happiness they're going to bring you. But a lot of people never get out of that loop. They go for more, 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 and then they scratch their head and say, it used to work, and now it doesn't. It's because if you look at it like a drug, we get tolerance to it. Today's focus is going to be all on the 40%, the internal state of mind and what you can do. And basically, positive psychology, they studied happy people, and they learned you can learn it and replicate what they do. And it's actually pretty easy. So in the beginning, positive psychology was called the science of happiness. And they've evolved away from that because happiness is sort of like a firework. It's like a spurt of like too much joy. And they realized that it's really not just about happiness. It's actually a constellation of more than one thing. Now the gold standard of what is now called well-being is called flourishing. So imagine it's like a bloom that's popping out and it sustains itself for a while. But you need more than one thing to flourish. And what you need is called PERMA. So the constellation are actually 5 components: positive emotions, engagement, relationships, meaning, and accomplishment. So let's double click on each one and see what they really mean. Positive emotions is pretty easy. It's what you feel: pleasure, ecstasy, warmth, contentment. Now imagine you can have this, and please note with all of these, most of these are free. You can have a positive emotion whether you have money, don't have money, whether you're warm, cold, hungry or not. Next is engagement, and a lot of us have experienced this, but we haven't been able to necessarily put our finger on it, and it's called flow. This is where you get involved with something where time stops. Raise your hand if there's something that you've done where just time seems to disappear for you. Just get so engaged in it. Raise your hand on that. What is it that you do that time stops for you? Theater. How about you? Designing. Dining? Designing. And how about you?
It's ridiculous. Analyzing complex Excel sheets.
Excellent. And how about you?
Yoga.
Yoga.
Gym.
Gym.
Reading.
Reading. Programming. Acting.
Watching sports.
Watching sports.
Traveling.
Traveling. Notice that we haven't had a repeat yet? Yes? Tennis.
And the first repeat, reading.
Reading, okay. And behind?
Reading.
Reading, yes.
Music.
Music. John.
Yeah, same music.
Okay, how about you?
I was going to say reading, but podcast.
Okay, now the reason I'm asking everyone is so that you can borrow some ideas and say, oh, that sounds pretty cool. Maybe I'll try some yoga. How about you?
Gaming.
Gaming?
Gaming.
Gaming?
Reading as well.
Reading as well?
Cooking.
Cooking? Fishing? Yoga? And we got you, and?
Animals, pets.
Animals. Did I miss anybody? Mine is painting, and I'm awful at it. I'm really bad. I actually went to a painting class. I got it for myself for Christmas. And since I'm so bad at it, I decided to sign up for abstract painting so that no one would really be able to judge if it's good or not. And I went to the teacher, and the teacher said, why are you taking the class? And I said, I just enjoy it, and I want to do something that I'm not good at because I'm a perfectionist, and I just want to do something where I'm not being judged. I don't care. I'm not trying to grow with it. I just want to enjoy the moment. And everyone looked at me like I was crazy. And I said, you know, I kind of have an issue with Boston, where I come from. I go, no one in Boston jogs. We're all training for a marathon. No one goes for a hike. I'm prepping for Mount Everest. Like, why do we have to do everything that is this monumental thing? Why can't we just do something and not put a number on it or judge it? And the teacher actually ignored me for the majority of the class, and I really didn't mind. Actually, he came over once, and I like the dab, like get that big 3D, chunk of paint on it, and I'm like dabbing at it, and he goes, can I show you a better way? And I go, no, this is great. He never came back. The cool thing about engagement, you don't have emotions during that time. You don't feel joy, you don't feel depression, you feel nothing. You are just in the zone. And Mikhail Csikszentmihalyi is the one that actually came up with the concept of flow. But anytime time stops for you, then you know that you're in flow. And the more times you go into flow, the better off you're going to be. So none of what you're doing is a waste of time. It's actually part of you nourishing your soul for well-being. So the more you find opportunities for flow, the better off you're going to enjoy your life. So if any of you think of this as, oh, I'm wasting time or I'm goofing off, no, it's actually really important for humans to have as much flow as possible. Number 3 is relationships. So this is loving and being loved and being within community. Now, if someone loves you and you don't love them back, that could be harassment. If you love them and they don't love you back, that could be stalking. So what we want to look for here is the reciprocal, that you are loved and loved back by the same person. So it's a reciprocal, yes. And community is just basically loving your friends, loving your family, loving your neighbors. As many people as you can love is great. Now, this is one of the oldest studies that was done at Harvard. It was done in the 1930s, and they wanted to track these super successful people, who, by the way, were all men, and find out what contributes to well-being and longevity. Like, what is the secret of life? It wasn't money or fame. It was close relationships. Now, what's interesting to me about this is that these were all men from the 1930s. They didn't talk about emotions. They don't talk about love and close relationships, but they did here. And it was actually the only variable that they could find in common between people feeling satisfied and longevity. So this is actually pretty meaningful. Imagine what the results would have been if it had been in more modern times that had women in it, where we could actually talk more about our feelings instead of being ashamed of them back in the 1930s. Number 4 is meaning, which is part of belonging to something. Humans really weren't meant to be totally independent. We're still a tribal community. We need to belong to something. We also need to serve something so that we can be a servant, not the master. We also need to feel that we are a part of something greater than ourselves, which could be our mission. Working for a company that has a mission that you really love is incredibly important. If you're just at the company for the paycheck, being mindful that a third of your time is spent at work, and a third is sleeping, a third of your life is in the wrong spot. So I'd encourage you really to be aligned with the mission of where you work so that you could fulfill this component, because it's actually a really big one. Next is accomplishment. Now this one's a bit funny. This is about winning and achievement, and you don't have to actually win anything. You don't have to win money. You don't have to win a prize. So raise your hand if you go into flow with video games. I saw you were in the last row. Okay, all the video game people, do you feel like you've accomplished something when you win but you don't get anything for it? Yeah, it's a human thing. It's like we like to win. Even if the stakes are really low, it's still actually really important to us. So what you're doing with video games and winning a game, it's not meaningless. It's actually important on two levels of PERMA. You're going into flow and you get a sense of accomplishment. It's why we like it. Now, this is the PERMA wheel. If you have your phones with you, I encourage you to take a picture of this and take this test for yourself in the privacy of your own home. The reason I tell you about the privacy of your own home is that we really want to have honest answers. And if you see people next to you, you might not want to fill out the box. You might want to look good and have the perfect PERMA wheel. And I'm going to give you an example of how PERMA wheels work. So when you see this M10, a 10 is the highest. So in the meaning box, let's say I have a purposeful existence, and I go, yeah, I do. You put a dot here, and you just cross over the pie. If your meaningfulness in life is a 5, you go in the middle and cross over. And so R for relationship, and so on around. Now, let's take a look at Dr. Bob. Dr. Bob is a famous cancer doctor. Everyone loves Dr. Bob. So let's take a look at his PERMA wheel. Well, accomplishment, he's the head of a hospital in Boston or London. So he's the #1 guy. Okay, well, accomplishment, he gets a 10 in accomplishment, so he draws his line across. Perfect. Meaning, he saves lives every single day. He's about as close to God on earth as you get. So sure, a lot of meaning. People love what he does. Engagement, flow, well, he's about a 9, maybe an 8, because he's been doing it so many years that the flow kind of thing, he might be looking for something else, but he's so famous and well paid, he doesn't change jobs. But the flow is starting to drop for him. Positive emotions, not really, because everyone's bugging him. Hey, we have someone that needs you. They're going to die if you don't come. So Dr. Bob works 7 days a week. So his positive emotions, they're not really there because he's not fulfilling himself on other levels. He doesn't go into flow. He doesn't play video games or go to tennis or yoga. He's too busy working, making money. So the positive emotions are pretty low. And relationships, he hasn't seen his friends in a while. His wife is divorcing him because they haven't had a date in about 3 years. So on the personal level, low on relationships, low on positive emotions, and he's high on the others. So I ask you, if this is a wheel of life, does the wheel roll? No. And I find that when I did this, I was in the same thing. Like I have a lot of achievement, I have meaning, I have engagement, I have positive emotions, but relationships. I love my friends, but I don't think they're as important as work. To me, when I'm with my friends, I'm goofing off. I'm drinking, I'm hanging out, I'm going for a hike, going to a movie, having some pizza, but that's not as important as doing a course proposal or writing a book. And I realized, oh, it's me. That's the problem. It's not the PERMA wheel. My friends are just as important as my job. And my wheel has a big bump in it because I'm not valuing my friendships as much as I should. And so I've decided that my weekends are going to go back to being weekends as opposed to opportunities to make up for what I don't get done Monday through Friday. So even teaching this, it allows me to realize, oh, yeah, even I'm out of balance. So again, when you go home, ask yourself, where are you? And you'll see which part of the PERMA wheel that you're not doing well in and that you can start to focus on. But by being able to do a PERMA wheel, it allows you to say, why am I not, going on all cylinders? By being able to pick it out, you can start to analyze, oh, it's because of this. I'm doing too much of this or too little of that. And this can help you with your own self-diagnosis. And again, send this around to friends. See what they think of it. Now, here are well-being exercises that have actually scientifically been proven to work. And I'd love to hear your ideas. What do you think is the #1 thing you can do to make yourself happier? You only get a choice of one. So just raise your hand. What do you think it would be? Yes, sir. Exercise. Endorphin rush. That's a good one. Anybody else?
Being with friends or a loved one.
Being with friends, so loving and being loved back, possibly going into flow at the same time. Yes?
Smile.
A smile. Yeah, we get endorphins off of that one as well. What else would you think? So we've got exercise, we've got being with friends, smiling. If you could choose one thing, what do you think it would work for you?
For me, right now, meditation.
Meditation, that's a good one. How about you? What would you think? Just take a guess. It's a weird answer, so don't worry about getting it right.
For me, it works a lot too, exercise.
Exercise, yes. How about you?
I'm divided between exercise and spending time with people. So
Okay, how about you? What do you think?
Oh, it's very hard. I'd say exercise as well.
Exercise, okay. Kindness. It's doing a kindness for another person. And when you think about it and you unpack it, it kind of makes sense. I get to feel good about myself because I just did something nice for somebody else. That's pretty good. It also means that I have some power and agency, that I'm able to do something for someone else. And any kind of guilt feelings you might have about being selfish, this is about the most selfless thing you can do, and it really allows you to have better self-regard. Now, we have an exercise for you because I promised to pop up your happiness. If this is the number one thing you can do, this is what we're going to do. I'm going to ask you to think, this is your homework, within the next 48 hours, this is an invitation. It's not a homework assignment, it's an invitation. Think of one unexpected kind thing you could do for someone else. Now, we have tried this. We did it in Holt, Boston, and I'll share with you what worked and what didn't work so that you don't make the same mistake. Try to not involve money into the equation. So don't buy anybody anything. So let's say that Eric and I work together. Well, I'm not going to buy you a Starbucks coffee, but if we get free coffee here, I could go to the machine, make you your macchiato, put in a little extra half and half and maybe some sugar, and bring you the perfect coffee, knowing that it's free here, but I did something nice. I brought it to your desk, and it was exactly what you wanted. What we ran into in Holt, Boston, is some of our freshman students bought homeless people lunch. It didn't work out well. Guess why? Why wouldn't that work well? Think about dignity. It reduced people's dignity. It also came up with the assumption that they wanted food when they didn't necessarily want food. And a lot of homeless people in Boston have mental health issues, so you don't necessarily know what the response is going to be. So try to avoid doing that one, because that really didn't work out. And also, money can be a little weird for people, so try to do something that doesn't involve money. And what I'd encourage you to do is think of a thought seed now, like who is a person you'd like to do something nice for, and what's something that you think that they would enjoy. And what we're going to do now is brainstorm with your neighbor next to you, that could be next to you or in front of you, behind you, and just share with them what kindness you're kind of thinking about doing, just to kind of get the brainstorming juices flowing. And we're going to start to cross-pollinate different things that we can do for people. So take the next minute, so 1 minute per person. So one person goes, the other person just listen quietly, and then switch after a minute. And go ahead. Need a partner?
Yes.
All right, what are you thinking?
I'm not sure. I'm going out with my girlfriend tomorrow night, so maybe. I mean, I know it shouldn't be about money, but I never bought her flower in 5 years, so maybe I can buy her a flower just because it's not about the money. It's not gonna be expensive, but she's gonna find it as like a nice gesture. You know?
That's a good one. That's a good one. My kindness would be, Julia's been super nice to me, hosting me here for the week, and I like to do these adult postcards, adult coloring books, because you know my art's bad, and I just color them in, and then I mail them to people, and no one ever gets handwritten notes anymore.
That's true. It's very nice.
And she'll see that I spent time like doing the, coloring it in.
That's a nice one as well.
So yeah, we'll see where that goes. But I like hers. I hope she likes the roses. Well, not roses, but whatever. What? Make it a good one. Thanks.
Having asked for it.
It's about 30 more seconds. And so coming back to the group, and I'm curious, I'd like us again to share different acts of kindness that we could do just to get some ideas in the room. Would you be willing to share the kindness you shared with me?
Yes. So tomorrow night I'm going out with my girlfriend, and in 5 years, I know it's not gonna be, it shouldn't be about money, but I never bought her a flower, so I'm gonna buy her one flower. She always complains I never did it.
That's pretty good. How about you?
Bringing some sweets to the team.
Sweets to the team. How about you?
We're just thinking to offer to help someone.
Offer to help someone. Yes. And how about you?
Yes, I'm thinking about preparing a meal for the loved one because I don't usually cook. So that would be a great surprise. So, yeah.
Oh, excellent. And how about you, right behind?
We spoke about a card, like a handwritten card.
Yes, handwritten cards are great. How about you?
Yeah, we also spoke about giving a message, although I'm stealing my colleague's idea.
Borrowing. Yes. Borrowing's welcome. Excellent. So what I'm going to ask you to do, there's a lot to be said about intention, social responsibility, and accomplishing a goal. So for a New Year's resolution, if you share that with someone, hey, I want to do ABC, if you share that with one person, you have a 40% increased chance of it actually happening. But what I'm going to invite you to do is the people that join the WhatsApp group is to go into the WhatsApp group and just share the intention of the kindness that you're thinking of doing. And all you have to do is, I'm thinking of cooking a meal for someone I care about. I'm thinking of giving a flower to someone I care about. And what you're doing is that you're putting it out into the universe, and I'm going to encourage you to feel, how do you feel after you put it in? And you'll get your first bump of happiness when you realize, oh, yeah, that could be a really cool thing to do. So if you're interested in really getting a bump in your happiness, pop into the WhatsApp group, put that intention in there. You don't actually have to do it, but if you feel so encouraged, I encourage you to try it in the next 48 hours. And I think you'll be very surprised at what a bump you get in happiness when you actually do it. And yes, there is a risk of that. The first time I did this was some exercises I was trying to do with intimacy with friends. Now, I like my friends, but I don't want to go out there and say, I really like you. I'm just like, you just kind of like, no, I do. It was too hard for me. So what I started to do, and it was advice, was mail a letter. So I got these adult coloring books that came in the format of postcards. And you know I like to draw, but I'm no good at it. So these adult coloring ones, you just color them in, and they look good. And on the back was the postcard. And so I wrote to my closest friends, and I got really specific. And I said, I really appreciate your friendship. You make me feel like I'm worth liking, because sometimes I don't feel that way. Put a stamp on it, and threw it in the box, and let it go. And there was a risk in that. I was scared to do it, but I did it. A year later, I go over to my friend's house to go watch a football game. And I go into his kitchen to get a beer. And on the refrigerator is something that it like caught my eye. I'd seen it before. And I looked at it. I'm like, where have I seen that before? Like, oh, that was the postcard I sent him a year ago. He kept it. And he put it on his refrigerator. I was like, wow, that meant something to him. So you might make people feel really amazing when you do this. So I'd encourage you to really think about it. So let's keep on moving. Oh, by the way, the group that we're in, you can be in it for just the night, pop out tomorrow morning, that's fine. Please avoid doing any likes or commenting on other people's comments, saying, hey, that's really great, good for you. And I'm going to show you why likes are actually something that we want to start avoiding. Now, this next one is going to be, again, you're going to be holding up fingers. Who can you call at 4 a.m. and tell your troubles to? So if it's one person, hold up one finger. If it's 5 people, hold up 5. If it's no one, just don't hold up your hand. So think about, who could you really call at 4 a.m. and be like, oh, man, I got to talk to someone. So think of that. So now this could be anybody. It could be relatives, it could be friends. It doesn't really matter. But hold up fingers now of how many people you could call at 4 a.m. when things are really bad.
What if we know they turn on flight mode?
That's okay. Imagine that the phone is on. Yep. Okay. The more fingers you up, the longer you will live. That's according to a study by Harvard psychologist George Vaillant. And what he found is that when you're able to call someone at 4 a.m., that means that you know that you're loved. You know that it's okay for that phone call to come in and you're not going to be so worried, like, no, I'm going to wake them up. Now they love me. It's okay. I'm really in trouble and I know that they'll be okay with that. If you have the capacity to be loved, you can actually live longer because you're connected to human beings. So if you don't have enough fingers on your hand, you want more, what I encourage you to do is find someone who you're willing to take a 4 o'clock call from and say, what's your name? Andrea. So let's say that, we work together and I would be willing to take your call at 4 a.m. I would say, Andrea, I know we just worked together, but if there's ever anything going on at 4 a.m., you need someone to call, like emergency room, flat tire, I'd be honored if you called me and I would take your call. So now you'd be able to hold up that finger. And what do you think Andrea might say to me? Yeah. And then you get a finger up. And it just feels good to know, I got someone who can take care of me. It just feels good. Even though you don't make that many 4 a.m. calls, you'll start to feel what it's like to love and be loved back if you don't have enough of that in your life. John Cacioppo, social neuroscientist, discovered that loneliness is actually disabling and can be physically disabling, and that relationships are necessary for well-being. This actually trips into addiction, that addiction is considered in the addiction community to be the opposite of connection. That when people start to get into addictive behaviors, it's because they have detached from society and now they're isolated. And whether they are doing alcohol or drugs or shopping or gambling, it doesn't really matter what the activity is. It's the fact that there's been a loss of connection with community. So loneliness is actually the first sign that, hey, I need to start doing some more. Joining a club, doing anything, being outside of your house, but realizing that isolation is actually more dangerous to us for human thriving than we had actually originally thought of. And if you do something isolating, like let's say video games could be something solitary, as well as painting, as well as yoga. And I meditate, but I do all of these in groups. I do very few things on my own because I like to be in groups. And even though I go to a meditation, Shambhala in Boston, it's weird. Bunch of strangers, we show up and we're quiet for an hour. It's weird. But it kind of feels good to be with other people. And I don't meditate as long or as deeply when I'm on my own. So I find that being with people helps me as well. Now, this is where we start to get concerned about loneliness with the millennial population as well as younger, that this is actually one of the most at-risk populations. The younger they are, the more they can feel a loneliness issue. And again, this is where we start to get into some opportunity of where we can help people who we're serving in our businesses. So this is a recent study of almost 50,000 college students. Look at these numbers. Over 60%, very sad, very lonely, overwhelming anxiety. Not just nervous and worrying, but overwhelming anxiety. Over half, things are hopeless. These statistics are awful. Less than 20% never felt lonely. Less than a fifth. 12% seriously considered suicide. So for me, now that I know this information, I don't feel like I can just kind of go along like it's not happening, because it is happening. Most of my students, in my opinion, aren't flourishing. And again, I want to be very careful not to get into being a therapist or a psychologist, because I'm not. I'm not licensed for any of that. I'm a normal person who stumbled through life. And now I have some coping mechanisms that I can share with these people. I wish people had told me this when I was 18. I didn't learn about this until I was in my late 40s. So I feel like I've lost some time. I don't regret it, but the fact that I could help people have a better 3 decades, wow, I don't want to pass that one up. Now, why do we think this is happening? I mean, it's really kind of curious. I mean, what's the difference? So what University of Pennsylvania did is they took a look at social media and they found that it actually increases depression and loneliness. It actually creates at-risk community, even though social media was meant to keep us closer together. It ended up having the opposite effect. And here's why. Less social media equals less social comparison equals less anxiety and depression. It's the like button. It's the like button. That's why I'm not going to have any likes in my WhatsApp group. So here's what happens. I don't do that much on social media, but it happened to me. When I started this WhatsApp group for Boston Holt, we had 93 people come to our first session, this is a repeat of that. And everyone joined the group. We had, I think, like 130 people or so. And so that was fine. And then the next day, I started getting these messages. Jane left the group. John left the group. I'm like, I know these people. They're my friends. I'm like, they left the group. Why? It hurt my feelings. I felt personally rejected that these people left the group, even though I said, you only have to be in the group for a night and then you can leave. I told them to leave. And when they did, it hurt my feelings. This wasn't even a like. And now I'm seeing it. If every day you posted 3 things and you didn't get any likes, that's pretty devastating. Now, we all know no one puts up there and says, oh, here's my foreclosure notice from my bank. Here's my notice of being fired from my job. I just failed out. We all put on the good stuff. And, we all kind of embellish it. And, like I said, I don't have that much with social media, but when I saw the fake end of it, I was at my cousin Linda's Thanksgiving, and cousin Linda, pause this because I don't want you to hear this. It was a really boring time. Now, Linda is about 60-some years old. But she's a Facebook fiend. I mean, she's addicted to it. So we're having Thanksgiving dinner. It was kind of dull. It's just dull. She takes out her phone and she starts photographing all the food and ignoring us. And she's photographing. What's she doing? Like, she's the host and she's photographing the food. And then she's playing around with the phone, and we get in the car and we go back to the hotel. And my sister is very close to cousin Linda. And she goes, oh, Linda posted on Facebook. So Linda had these beautiful photographs of all the dishes, and it looked like the most festive Thanksgiving you've ever been to. And I'm like, this was the dullest thing I've ever been to. And it looked great on Facebook. And that was when I realized everyone's just photoshopping it all. It's just not real. And so it's fake. It's just not the real world. But now I'm starting to understand where we put ourselves out there and our feelings are being crushed. So I just say, don't play the game. If you put a post up, and this is just my suggestion, just say, I'm putting a post up. Please don't like it, dislike it, or comment on it. I'm just putting it out there. And then you're not putting yourself up for rejection, and see what happens. Now, this actually is part of our survival. When anthropologists were looking at social groups with survival and non-survival, social groups survive because of brainstorming and cooperation. So imagine that we're a tribe. If we talk and we cooperate, we could live because we're one big brain helping each other out. But what if we were non-social? What do non-social groups do? They compete. They go to war. You could actually starve because you're not getting the love that you need. There was actually an experiment done centuries ago. I think it was between France and England. They were trying to figure out what was the natural language, English or French. And so they had a population of newborns, and they isolated them and said to the nurses, to feed them, but don't talk to them. And so to see what happens when they grow up, what natural language comes out. And guess what natural language came out? Take a guess. Any guesses? None, because they all died. They didn't get love. They got food, but they didn't get held, and they weren't spoken to. So they never actually came out with any natural language. They died before the age of being able to speak. And I was like, nobody needs me. I don't matter anymore. I used to have 1,200 clients, and my phone was always blowing up. My email box was always full. Nothing. And it was really depressing. I didn't have a plan B. And what I realized was the American dream was not my dream. The unfortunate thing is I kept trying to make it my dream. Well, what ended up happening? Started drinking a lot, started smoking a lot, got really depressed, but I never sought help because I didn't have a real reason to be depressed. I actually finally broke down and went to the doctor. I was misdiagnosed for lots of different things, and I went through 24 different psychotropic drugs. They didn't really work. The side effects worked. I lost my sex drive. I gained about 50 pounds. I couldn't see outside my right eye, so I had to get a driver because I couldn't drive anymore. So it was pretty miserable. And then I got even more desperate, and I decided I'm going to study mind-body medicine because I'm out of options. And fortunately, at Harvard, they had the most popular class in their 500-year history, and it was positive psychology. Over 1,250 students had signed up, and I wiggled my way into the class. And that's actually what turned the tide for me. And what I learned was something really simple. I didn't have a purpose. So I went out and I started another company. And with that company, I ended up learning that I like to teach. And that's how I became an instructor at Harvard, because I was... Okay, let's take a look here. So this is how you score it. The first 3 questions, these are the core features: positive emotions, engagement, meaning, and purpose, and then 6 additional. So what we want to do is add these up. So each one gets a point. So we have the 3 core features were the first 3 questions, and then you have 6 additional after that. So here's what we're looking for flourishing. You want to have all 3 core features: positive emotion, engagement, and purpose. And you want 3 out of the 6 additional features. So it's kind of like getting sides on your entree. You know, would you like fries or coleslaw? Now, this also lets you know if you're lacking in an area where you can start to focus. So maybe doing more of what works for you might not be the way to go. Maybe do more of what you're not doing enough of. So maybe goofing off a little bit more, spending more social time, doing things that put you into flow. Now, this is flourishing across European countries. And notice the scale, that the best you get is 35% of a population feeling like they're flourishing. Anyone know what the top country is? They tend to get it almost every year. Costa Rica. Anybody else?
Oh, no, sorry, it's European.
Yep.
Denmark.
Denmark. Yeah. What I think is funny is that the Northern European countries tend to get it. They seem to rotate, like Finland, Norway, Denmark. And I spent significant time in Finland, and I don't know. You know, I mean, they're nice, but I don't know, it was the cold thing. The summer's great. The summer's great. But yeah, the wintertime, I just never left the sauna. So I don't know. But I just think it's kind of sad that 35 is like the top. I mean, that means 2/3 aren't really feeling that way. But what is funny is that I go to other countries that have like no money, like the Philippines, they're happy. It's pretty interesting. So again, we come back, we'll talk about that with communities and countries. Now, the next thing that you can do to pop your happiness is what is called the What Went Well exercise. And there's a little bit of a twist on this from other things you may have heard. Now, humans have a natural catastrophic bent. And that's because we're basically related from the same strain. That imagine that we're all in the cave. And this is way back in caveman, cavewoman time. And you've got a happy cave person and you have a negative biased one. So what happens when the tiger comes into the cave? Well, the happy person said, "Pretty kitty," and got killed. The person with the negative bent said, "Hey, I don't know what you are, so I'm either going to run away from you or I'm going to kill you." And so fight or flight is what kept our species alive, that we basically are afraid of or aggressive against things that we don't know or understand. So as human beings, we just have a natural bent towards negativity, and that's part of our survival. The problem that we have, though, is we're no longer cavemen and cavewomen, but we still react that way emotionally. So if I were to say to you, for example, what's your name? What? Aki. So if I go, hey, Aki, can you come into, imagine I'm your boss. Aki, can you come into my office for a few minutes at the end of the day? Just want to talk to you. Thanks. So you'd be freaked out. Now, your physical response is going to be like the tiger sitting here. Now, what's the worst I could do to you? Yell at you? Fire you? You look smart. You'll probably get a job somewhere else. You're probably not going to end up homeless. You're certainly not going to die, but your body might feel that way. Your panic might feel that way. So our negativity response is a little bit overboard for our society. There's very little that I can really do to you to be harmful, but your body's kind of overreacting. And that's pretty much how we are right now. So for the next 7 days, write down 3 things that went well that day and why. You need the and why, because this is going to start to help you identify what your strengths are. A lot of us are not aware of our core strengths because they are such a part of us, we don't know that they're a strength. Now, when I was still depressed and kind of like pulling myself out of it, I realized I needed to work, I needed a purpose, but I didn't know what I wanted to do. I was really confused, and a friend gave me great advice and said, go to your 5 closest friends and say, what do you see as my strengths and what do you think you'd see me doing as a job? So I went to a friend of mine, Nick Craig, who taught at the Wharton School of Business, and I said, Nick, what do you see as a strength of mine? And he goes, oh, that's easy. You explain complex concepts very simply. And I turned red in the face. And he's like, what's wrong? And I said, that's because I think I'm sort of stupid. He's like, what do you mean? I go, I've always had to work harder than everybody else. I don't naturally get things. I have to spend a lot more time on it than other people to grasp it. And for me to remember it and hold it in my brain, I have to break it down really simply so that I can get it and then I can build it back up. But no. I go, that's why I do that. He goes, well, you're a teacher. I'm like, what? He's like, well, that's what teachers do. They break it down and make it simple. It's like, oh. Had I never asked Nick Craig, I wouldn't be here today. It never occurred to me to teach. So he pointed out a strength that I had that I actually thought was a weakness. So I would encourage you, when you do the what went well exercise, when you write down why it went well, you start to talk about the strength that you have. So I find that for myself, a lot of things that went well for me is because I'm persistent. I just keep banging at it, and eventually I get it. Not in an obnoxious way, but I'm more like, if I want to get there, I have to work harder than other people, and persistence is actually a strength. So would someone be willing to share with me one thing that went well for you in the last 24 hours? Just one thing, and let's try to pick it apart. What went well for you in the last day? Yeah, just one thing. Doesn't matter what it is.
At the moment, the president suddenly chatted to me today.
Oh, the president chatted to you today. Excellent. Oh, let's say good for you. That's great. Okay.
Yeah, but then I responded back. I think I was okay responding quite quickly. So
That's fine. So he wrote to you.
yeah, very suddenly.
Very suddenly. But now why you? What strength did you have that made him say, I'm going to write to her?
Because I'm the manager for the market, so he wanted to know description from me.
Okay, so you're the manager for the market. That's your position. But what's your strength? What's good about you where he said, I want to send her an email? And don't be shy about this. This isn't bragging. This is just recognizing your strengths. So what do you think he really saw in you where he thought that email is a productive use of his time?
I think because I manage the market for years now, so he knows that I'm the go-to person.
You have experience.
Yeah.
Do you have high quality work?
Yeah. I want to say
Maybe you do high quality work. It's okay to acknowledge that. That's okay. That's not bragging. That's being aware of your strength. And the more you're aware of that strength, the more you're going to be able to see it in other areas that you can apply it to. So again, we do this privately and we write it down so that you don't have to feel shy about bragging. You just write it to yourself, and that's okay. How about something for you? What went well in the last 24 hours? Yeah.
I finished all my
Yes. Good for you. Excellent. Yes, I love it. No. So what strength do you have that made you do everything on your to-do list?
I think I'm quite organized and focused when I get into the tasks. Just
Yes.
one by one they get done.
Organized and focused. And the more we start to realize what strength was it that helped us accomplish that, the more we can start to be aware of those strengths. How about you? What's a good thing for you?
Although maybe you can't tell from my voice, but I'm getting healthier. I've battled a cold this week, so.
Excellent. And why are you getting healthier? What strength did you use that's getting you healthier?
Self-awareness. I made sure to reduce strain, just go home and rearrange plans to actually go home and get healthy.
Great. So you're acknowledging that you come first, self-care. Beautiful. And self-awareness. Very nice. So I encourage you, do take the time. This literally takes about 3 minutes to do. It's that short. And it doesn't have to be a journal. It doesn't have to be like this big thing. It could be on a piece of scrap paper and throw it out. But do write it down. Writing it down, not typing it into your phone, that's okay. But writing it down is more important because it really slows the brain down because it takes so long to write. It makes you really consider, yes, that was a good thing. And yes, because I have this great strength. And it's okay to take a moment of time to say something went well in my life, and I'm acknowledging it's because I'm doing something well, and these are my strengths. So this is actually good for you. This is not bragging, which is why we just write it privately. So we just did the let's try it now part. This is going to be, let me see how many responses we got on the SurveyMonkey to see if we have enough of a core mass to share with it. Oh, yeah, we did. Wow, we got 17. Okay, so I'm just going to read these off to you, and I'm going to give them to you in percentages. So number 1, positive emotion. Taking all things together, how happy would you say you are? 88% said yes. That's really good. Now, you can compare this with Boston. Now, Boston, we had 83 respondents. Most of these were college students. So we got 73% of college students, and you're older, so you're about 88. That actually kind of makes sense. Engagement and interest. I love learning new things. So Boston students, 95%. This group, 88%. Boston for meaning and purpose, generally feeling that what I do in my life is invaluable and worthwhile. Boston students, 59%. Your group, 71%. Number 4, self-esteem. In general, I feel very positive about myself. 57%. Your group, 65. So notice that your well-being is actually higher than college students. That kind of matches the data that we've already been seeing from the research scientists. Number 5, I am always optimistic about my future. Boston students, 66%. Ooh, 47. Growth opportunity. Okay, number 6, resilience. When things go wrong in my life, it generally takes me a long time to get back to normal. 65% said false, and false is what we're looking for. This group, 59. So another opportunity. One thing I will show you is that human beings actually overcome negative events much faster and stronger in shorter period of time than we actually estimate. We're really not good at estimating recovery from bad events, and we overestimate good events. So we're a bit on the opposite side there. Vitality. Boston students, only 55% feel strong and have energy. Your group, 65. Now, when I actually dug into this and I asked them, they came up with a really weird response that actually might be true, that they're eating cafeteria food, and they said it's mostly fried and not really good. That when they were living off campus, they were eating healthier diets and they had more energy. So there might be something about the diet. I wasn't expecting that response, but that's what they told me. Self-determination. I make choices and decisions in my life free from undue external influence. 60% said yes. This group, 53, which is a bit interesting because they have parents running their lives, telling them to do majors that they might necessarily want to do. And then positive relationships. I was really happy to see this one, 95%. It's really important for them because a lot of them are not from the United States. They've left their home country, their home culture, and their family, so they could really be at risk for that. So I was really glad to see that they scored so highly on this one. And your group, 100%. So that's excellent. Good for you. So this was an interesting comparison. Now we're going to move over into Mythbusters about what we tend to think about what makes us happy or what doesn't make us happy. And so this is basically life events and life satisfaction split between gender. Marriage. Well, it seems the happiest that you're ever going to be is right before you walk down the aisle, and then it's kind of downhill from there. Now, this is the women, and it looks like after year 5, they're kind of underwater on what they're doing. Guys are kind of still on the, it's fine, everything's fine. The women, I don't know. Divorce, this is a funny one. Guys love divorce. I mean, they get, the minute it happens, it's like, yeah, let's go out. And also women as well, they tend to be happier. So what we learn from this is, take a look at this one. Unhappy, unhappy, unhappy. The minute the divorce hits, this is where they know it's going to happen. Don't be afraid to get a divorce. If it's not working out, you do whatever you can to fix it if that's what you want to do. But if the thing's dead on arrival, don't wait around. I also know lots of friends who waited around for their children to go to college, saying they don't want to have a broken family and da-da-da. At the end of it, the children were usually like, I wish you had done it earlier. So don't be afraid of it, because again, if you don't believe in reincarnation, we only get one shot at this life, so let's not waste it. Unemployment. This is an interesting one, and this might be cultural as well, but it's worse for men to have long-term unemployment than women. And that might be a bit of a macho breadwinner thing, but one of the worst things that could actually happen to a human, most specifically men, is to have long-term unemployment. It just kind of eats away at the self-esteem, and I think that's what happened to me when I was retired. I didn't consider myself retired. I consider myself unemployed and unemployable because I couldn't go back to what I was doing before. So the way I interpret this data, which is me, and I'm not a scientist, is that if I lost a really good paying job, I might just take a kind of mediocre job just to have a place to go and to get up in the morning and get a paycheck. And it might not be great working at Dunkin' Donuts, but it's probably better than sleeping in bed all day. At least that's what I would do for myself, that I think humans just aren't meant to sit around. Widowhood. I have some experience with this with my aunts, that the worst is when they're dying and your partner, let's say, is in hospice. But right after they die, you recover from that pretty quickly. So this is a huge negative event in someone's life, losing a spouse. But the recovery is pretty fast and pretty sharp the minute it happens, mostly because the worst is over and you already went through the horrible thing of like watching them die. So once the worst is over, it's pretty much uphill from there, but we certainly don't feel that way when we're going through it. But be mindful that the worst thing that's going to happen is the day that they die, and then it's going to be up from there. And granted, there's a recovery period that can take some time, but the spike up is further than what we thought it would be. Birth of a child. Here's mom. Okay. I mean, there wasn't even like a spike. It's just a slope down and then it ends off. And yeah, this is going up to the kids is like age 5. I would love to see this at 18, like if it like pops up once they go to college. We don't know. But an interesting thing here is that, yeah, having kids isn't going to make you happier. It is something that we feel that we want to do and should do, and you get fulfillment and some great things out of it, but happiness spikes are not one of them. Now let's move into economics and positive psychology. There's a thing called the Easterlin paradox, where they found that in rich societies, rich people tend to be happier than poor people. Okay, that makes sense. However, rich societies are not happier than poor societies. Raise your hand if you've ever been to the Philippines. And what did you think about their happiness level?
Happiest people.
Yeah, what did you think?
I didn't get a feeling.
No feeling. Okay, so we have really happy, very happy. Who else? What did you think? Happy. How about you? I couldn't understand it. I went to give a speech there, And the traffic was just an absolute nightmare. Pollution pluming out of those jeepney things. But I'm looking at the people sitting on their chairs, which were milk crates, and the one single bottle, the bulb, and they're happy as could be. The same thing happened when I went to teach in Armenia, and I was teaching for a while, and it was a relatively luxurious experience, and they said, well, we're going to give you a tour guide for the day as a thank you for doing your thing. So they give me a driver, and we saw some sights, and then the driver said, I want you to meet my family. It's like, oh, okay. So we drive to his house, and I actually got scared. It looked like a bunker. It didn't even look like a house. It looked kind of like a warehouse. So I was sort of like, am I going to be like ransomed? I got scared. We walk in, and there was plastic all over the furniture, and it wasn't a great home, but there was this little kid with his little tricycle going up and down the family room, laughing, having a good old time, and Mom was really nice. They were very proud. They took out the really nice china for the tea, and I said, I have to go to the bathroom. Could you tell me where the bathroom is? And the guy goes, oh, I have to change the pipe for you. Okay. So he goes into the shower room, unscrews a garden hose, and then moves it into the room that had the toilet and screws the garden hose in because that was the water supply and that was the toilet. I thought, wow, that's poor. But while I was using the bathroom, I thought to myself, that little kid's happy as can be. And that little kid's happier than me. And this is all he knows. And that was when I realized, and I got the idea, I think poverty is a mindset. I don't think it has anything to do with money. I think it has to do with how you're feeling right now. And I don't know if it's a good idea or a bad idea to connect Armenians and Filipinos to the internet where they can start looking at Bentleys and mega yachts. I mean, I don't know what the effect would be. Would that give them an aspiration to work harder? Or would that make them feel like, oh my God, I'm just not doing well? So I'm not really sure, but I kind of walked away from there thinking, if these people can be happy with what they have, I have no excuse. So when I'm having my own personal pity party, I think about those people and I think, what do they have that I don't? Probably peace of mind and better relationships than I have. So I've really worked very hard, and especially with teaching this, I've really delinked my happiness from money because I've had plenty of it, and that was actually my worst years, but I always have room for a better friend. So that's pretty much where I'm focusing my time. And as far as meaning and purpose, teaching has been the best thing ever. It was better than anything I've done, especially to beginners, because when I teach them things that they've never heard before, and they're like, oh my God, that's so cool. I'm like, wow, thanks. Like I feel like I've done something, and I have. So teaching's really very meaningful for me. Now, here's a satisfaction measure, and again, look at what we're measuring, GDP and money and countries, and naturally you have this slope going upwards. However, there's some strange outliers. Costa Rica is happier than the United States, but look at the delta in the money, 8,000 to 32,000. And Hong Kong is just about as happy as people in Myanmar and Kosovo. So this is where you get a link with money, but then there's like a de-link with the money as well. So it wouldn't surprise me if people in Myanmar, Bolivia, India, Kosovo, Zambia might have closer loving relationships than people in Hong Kong. I don't know. But it's interesting where you get the link and the de-link from the money. And I also think that we might be measuring the wrong thing. So when we ask these happiness questions in the surveys, they're not asking about emotional well-being necessarily. They ask about life evaluation. So imagine that I'm someone's husband or wife, and I'm being verbally and physically abused, but I'm married to a billionaire. So when someone says, hey, how's your life? Well, I live in a palace. I have a chauffeur for my Bentley. I think my life is really good. But emotionally, I'm a nightmare. But I don't want to share that with people. So I think what people are measuring isn't emotional well-being, but you saying, yeah, you know what, I'm happy because I should be happy because of what I have. But privately, things aren't going so great. So I think we might actually not be measuring the right things. Here are some statistics for the last half century in the United States. GDP tripled, life satisfaction flatline, depression up 1,000%. Kind of food for thought. I think we're focusing on the wrong things. Now, here's where money comes in, and this is where I see the drug effect, that between $0 and $20,000, more money, more happy, very clearly. Because this is, I'm not warm, I don't have a bed, I'm not living indoors. So any incremental dollar is super meaningful. But at $20,000 globally, it starts to arc over where, okay, I already have a shirt. A second shirt isn't going to do that much for me, but that first shirt, super important. So again, money's important, but to a degree. And again, it makes you happier until you have enough. And enough is pretty easy to hit. So I looked at the cost of living in London versus Boston. It's pretty similar. If you're making anywhere between, let's say, 75 and 100,000 US dollars in Boston, you're going to start to plateau because you can live alone. You can take an Uber, special treat. Someone says, you want to go out to dinner? You can do it. You don't have to look at your pocketbook. Little emergency, you can take care of it. Vacation, you can have a decent one. But anything past that, it's not going to be really helpful. But we tend to go for more and more and more. And what I find is that when you go for more and more and more, you have less time to spend the money because you're probably the boss now. Or your life is so complicated that you get complicators. For example, at one point, I owned 5 houses at the same time. And I was always worried about them for good reason. One winter, my houses collectively were broken into 18 times. So it really sucks to go to your home and see that someone's used the hot tub and they drank all the booze and someone has slept in my bed. Someone's driven my car. Yeah, it doesn't. And then I get the bills from the police department for the false robbery when no one was there. So if I didn't have that stuff, then it probably wouldn't have happened. So now I rent an apartment in Boston, and the lobby and the facade of the building it's kind of gross. It's a bit dumpy, actually. But my neighbors have a much nicer place, and I'm like, that's good. They'll go rob them, and they'll leave me alone. So I don't really worry about it. And I rent. I don't own anymore. So Barbara Fredrickson did something called the Losada ratio, and this is something that you can use to gauge how your company is doing. They took 60 companies and split them between a third of them were doing well financially, a third were doing okay, and a third were failing. And they transcribed their meetings between positive and negative word ratios. And they found that companies that had 3 times as many positive words to negative words in a meeting, those companies were flourishing. If companies were at 16 to 1, they were about to go bankrupt because they were basically being Pollyanna and making it up. Saying, we're doing great, we're going to kill it. No, it just wasn't true. So if your Losada ratio is super high, you're kidding yourself. But 3 to 1 is healthy. Anything less than that is not doing well. Now, you can also predict divorce and sports winnings with this. Now, guess what Losada ratio you need to have a happy long-term marriage? What do you think the ratio is of positive words to negative words to have a long-term happy marriage? Let's take a guess.
5 to 1.
Jesus.
10 to 1.
No, 5 to 1. It's 5 to 1. That's a big number. I mean, 5 to 1 is a lot. And one thing, the number one predictor of a divorce is contempt. That's the number one. So if you find someone who has contempt for their partner, that can actually be a sign that they're going to be getting a divorce. But you need a 5 to 1 Losada ratio. And that includes being snarky and sarcastic. So those count as negatives. Also with sports teams, this is for betting. Anyone like to bet on sports teams? Okay, I'll give you a few hints. So if you take a look, the study with this one was they took a look at teams that had a losing streak. And they wanted to find who's going to get rid of their losing streak faster than another team. So they found that teams that when they lost and they did reports with the interviewers, if they said things like, our team's no good, that was a negative. They wouldn't get out of the losing streak. But if they had more positive words like, our team's great, it was just the referee, the umpire was doing poorly, those actually predicted that they would get rid of their losing streaks because they had more positive regard for their own ability and the team's ability. So basically, trash talking your team will keep you in a losing streak, which also means if you trash talk yourself, you'll maintain your own personal losing streak as well. So personal self-talk is also important. And then I'm going to finish up with this, that this doesn't exist now, but I think it should. What if we applied PERMA to business and leadership? So imagine if we had a company where the culture and the mission was anyone who comes in touch with us, from our customer to the people who work with us, to our leadership, our management, our suppliers, anyone who comes in contact with us, we want to make sure that they have positive emotions when they interact with our organization. We want them to be engaged with us. We want the relationships to be positive. We want to make sure that we're doing something meaningful in this world, and we want to accomplish something good. So imagine if we could do this. And where I see some opportunities for Hult, Harvard, EF, and Ashridge is we're customers. We have customers in this community. And we know that 2/3 of them might not be doing as well as they could. What if we had some programs that didn't get into psychotherapy and all that, but got into looking at healthy people and saying, this is how you flourish as a young person. This is what's important to you. So maybe playing that video game, yeah, that's good. Maybe playing tennis and basketball, if that's important to you, that's not goofing off. That's actually important. Your friends might be just as meaningful to you as doing your homework. So allowing them to see what is important to life for thriving might be something that we could teach and make a much better generation. Because right now the generation that I see are suffering. And now that we know this, I think that we have, personally I have an obligation, but I think as a community we have an opportunity to do something about this. And everyone's just going to get happier. So I appreciate the time that you have spent with me today, and I want to leave you with a few suggestions, and I'd like to do a feedback survey, and here's what the questions are. Would monthly workshops on positive psychology be of interest to you? And there's about 50 different topics. There's like resilience, there's gratitude, there's lots of subtopics that could be interesting. Do you think that there's room for positive psychology classes at Hult, EF, and Ashridge, online or in person? And what about positive business courses? They don't exist yet. And I think that we could have an opportunity of being trailblazers in creating a space that doesn't exist. And what do you think about a What Well Club? What went well? Where we all just kind of share, we applaud each other for doing well. And it's not bragging, it's just saying, good for you. And that will encourage us to keep going. And the last is a mastermind group, where we come around with our challenges, we throw them out to the community, and people brainstorm with us on how to actually come up with solutions to our challenges. We could act like one big brain. So the more feedback I get, the better I can tailor the offerings that I'd like to suggest and create. So I want to thank you for the time that you've spent with us today. If you want to stay in the group, that's great. I don't do many postings. If you want to pop out tomorrow, it will hurt my feelings, but I'm going to put that out there anyhow. So thank you for coming tonight. And I think there's free drinks now, right?
Yes.
Yes, absolutely. Thank you for coming, everyone.